people don't get less afraid. They get more brave. They get more courageous. So the only way that you kind of overcome those fears is by addressing them slowly, you know what I mean, in terms of just maybe just doing a 30-minute talk at a Toastmasters group and then doing the 2-minute talk and then doing the 5-minute talk and slowly building that courage to, face your fears head on.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Next Step. I'm Jeff Kozlowski, your host. Today we're catching up with Dr. Tom O'Connor, who earned his PhD in genetics here at SMD in 2023 and is now a scientist at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center in Buffalo, New York. In this episode, Tom shares insights on navigating the transition from graduate school to the workforce, his shift from muscle biology to cancer research, and how a passion for scientific writing shaped his career, an unexpected passion, I might add. He also offers advice on public speaking, networking, and the importance of taking time to reflect before diving into the next phase. Here he is. Let's welcome Tom. Tom, thank you so much for joining. How are you?
I'm great. How about you, Jeff?
Doing just fine. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. And I know you were at the University of Rochester, I guess it's been a few months now, talking to some of our trainees about sort of life a little bit leading up to that PhD thesis defense, and then what life was like for you about a year out, and things you were working on, in those 12 months after defending. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that today. But first, if you could just tell us a little bit, Tom, about what you're up to these days, what you're working on, and what you do at Roswell.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm actually originally from Buffalo. And so it kind of worked out great when I was looking at graduate schools in the first place. Rochester was actually a dream of mine for undergrad. That didn't happen. I went to state school, University at Buffalo, and then ended up coming to Rochester for graduate work, which worked out perfectly. Get a little bit of that separation from friends and family where I could lock in and get my studies done in Rochester. So it was great. My time in Rochester was in the Department of Biomedical Genetics, and ended up doing my thesis in Dr. Bob Dirkson's lab in Pharmacology and Physiology. And it was an incredible experience, doing a lot of stuff on exercise physiology, muscle biology, looking at different forms of myopathy, and seeing how exercise could augment some of the pathology associated with some of these like skeletal muscle disorders, which is really intriguing to me. Growing up playing a bunch of sports, I was always intrigued by the power of exercise, and really looking at it at the molecular level was so awesome for my 5 years at University of Rochester. So, but then moved back to Buffalo and did a little bit of a change of gears. Now I'm working in cancer and cell cycle and doing some scientific writing and research center coordination, and so it was a bit of a transition, but it's great to be back in my hometown and still maintain that connection with U of R.
Yeah. So what did your thesis end up focusing on?
It was kind of three-parted, and the first part was a lot of work that I had done in a previous mentor's lab, Dr. Joe Chikalical, who's now down at Duke University. And that was looking at muscle stem cells. So using transgenic mice, to look at muscle stem cell activation during exercise, and showing how, most people understand this just kind of intuitively from going to the gym. You go to the gym, you do resistance training, your muscles get bigger. Whereas with endurance training, like running, cycling, things of that nature, you still get this stem cell response where you might not get that hypertrophy or that muscle growth. But those muscles are now more ready to repair the muscle in terms of injury, in terms of protecting in aging from sarcopenia and significant muscle loss that can lead to frailty and fails that we know is a huge cause of mortality in the elderly. And so that was kind of the first part, looking at just exercise activating muscle stem cells. And then I transitioned into the effects of exercise to kind of augment radiation therapy. So in like childhood cancers, where kids will have a sarcoma. What happens is the tumor is typically surgically removed, and then these individuals will receive localized radiation that can cause damage to, obviously the tumor, but also that surrounding tissue. And some of these individuals will have growth defects. So what we looked at is using exercise to kind of augment and protect against those defects by activating that stem cell population to help with the recovery and regeneration after the surgical resection and the treatment with radiation. And then the final part was actually what I finished my work in grad school on in Bob Dirkson's lab, which was a lot of tubular aggregate myopathy. So it's a genetic mutation, form of skeletal muscle disorder based on this calcium channel in skeletal muscle, and looking at how exercise can augment some of these defects that they see in tubular aggregate myopathy, where muscles will develop these kind of like aggregated cores of proteins, very similar to what's seen in Alzheimer's, where you have these just kind of tau protein aggregates in the brain. Here you have these aggregates forming in skeletal muscle, and one of the main benefits of exercise is this improved proteostasis, which is pretty much the improved turnover of damaged proteins, the increase in heat shock proteins and different protein chaperones that aid in proper protein folding and proper protein activity, enzyme activity, all those things. And what we saw was that there was a pretty substantial impact and improvement with exercise on these mice that were models of these humans that have tubular aggregate myopathy. So it was really, really kind of all over the place in terms of, the tying thread was using exercise as therapy in a bunch of different aspects. So it was really, really intriguing work.
Yeah, and I guess I'm going a little bit out of order here, but I want to talk then about how you sort of ended up as where you are now at Roswell as a scientific writer and some of the other roles you have there. Sort of how did that, what did that transition look like, and how did you sort of get introduced to this work?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. At the end of my graduate work, my mentor, Bob Dirkson, he really encouraged me to take writing my thesis seriously, particularly in terms of the discussion. So, your thesis has a lot of the nuts and bolts that are standard for any PhD thesis, but you write your introduction, your main chapters that are all the research that you did, and then the discussion. And he really hit home to me about focusing on the discussion, really paying attention to adding your personality and kind of your character and your take on what's left to be done in the field. And it was a refreshing change of pace for me, because as most people will be aware of, a lot of scientific writing is pretty rigid, where you have to follow this kind of construct, for good purposes as well, that you want your research and your data and your experiments to be reproducible, that people can follow a protocol, verbatim, and that you'll get the same outcome. Whereas what was incredibly intriguing to me was writing the thesis, particularly that discussion chapter, where I was able to tie in personality, things that I wanted to see the field get into in terms of the impacts of exercise on the microbiome, tying in different concepts from related fields. I've always been a fan of Charlie Munger, chairman of Berkshire Hathaway for a number of years, partners with Warren Buffett, and it was just being able to tie in a Charlie Munger reference in my thesis on tubular aggregate myopathy and exercise physiology was just it was so fun for me. And so getting into that scientific writing was kind of a natural step. When I realized writing my thesis, I was really intrigued by being able to infuse scientific writing with a little bit of personality, a little bit of excitement, and get away from some of the just black and white, this happened and this happened, and it, add some personality to science. I don't think that's a bad thing.
That's so interesting. When people hear somebody's working on their thesis, it's often looked at, and it is like this gigantic project, a bear of a project. You actually, it kind of introduced a passion for you, or just kind of something new that you didn't know you were interested in maybe before.
Yeah, for sure. And that actually ties into, I didn't end up getting into teaching, but I actually applied to a handful of professor positions coming out of grad school. And that was the same thing where both of my parents are teachers. I did everything in my power to avoid teaching. And once again, my mentor, Bob Dirksen, he encouraged me. He had a friend at St. John Fisher University in Rochester that had an opening for an adjunct professor for one of the semesters, fall semester, while I was at U of R. And he encouraged me, Bob Dirksen encouraged me to pursue that. And so I did it, for many reasons. One, to, supplement the income of the graduate stipend that can be, a little difficult sometimes. But it was great. It was a great experience teaching and really just experiencing and kind of expanding the horizons to just see what's out there, see the different areas that are open in terms of the job market once you graduate. And I really loved teaching. It was an amazing experience, and same kind of thing, just expanding that comfort zone to see what you might be into, what you might not be into, and those are the experiences that reveal where you might want to take your career once you graduate.
Let's go back now before you defended your thesis. Can you talk a little bit about what you did in maybe some of the weeks or even months leading up to that thesis defense to sort of prepare yourself and get comfortable speaking and just presenting that work?
Yeah, so there were a couple of aspects to it. One, like you mentioned at the end there, the speaking part of it. A lot of people talk about that their fear of public speaking is greater than their fear of death, which has always been just a crazy thing to comprehend. But I think it's completely true. When you see people kind of sweating when they come up for a seminar or whatever, you need to expose yourself, like adjunct teaching or any of those experiences, you need to expose yourself to those things that are a little uncomfortable. So for me personally, there were a handful of things that I wanted to do to improve my public speaking leading into my thesis. One thing that I did was I enrolled in the science communication course that they have at U of R, the grad course. That was a great experience. They talk about speaking, but also poster presentations and a bunch of different classic areas of science communication. Another one was thinkers and drinkers. So I think they've actually reformed the group to be just thinkers. It was a little bit of a different time when I was at U of R only a couple of years ago, but that was another great group where they're focused on science communication, and that's in a different light where you're kind of engaging with the public. So I think one thing that COVID showed us is that scientists need to be able to communicate their science to anybody and everybody. This is publicly funded science, and if you want to maintain that funding from taxpayers that are providing the funding for your work, you have an obligation to appropriately and effectively communicate what you're doing to them and relaying the benefits of the work that you're doing. So I think that format of the thinkers group to be able to engage with the public was such a rewarding experience, and just being able to kind of think about discussing your findings to a more lay audience. And then one final thing that I did was I joined Toastmasters. So Toastmasters, they're a public speaking group. I actually was a member of a chapter here in Buffalo before I came to U of R.
Okay.
And same kind of thing. It's just a place where you can get up and talk, and they'll provide you feedback on your filler words, on your so's, your ums, your ahs, all of that stuff. Just provides that format to get practice public speaking. And I actually used that group to actually do a practice talk, just a brief part of my introduction for my thesis, to bounce it off of them in terms of some of the introductory stuff of, where they're more of a lay audience, the Toastmasters group at University of Rochester. So it was a great opportunity to get feedback from them of, okay, what didn't make any sense? What am I jumping completely over? Where can I pause a little bit better to allow for a transition between different topics? And I can't speak highly enough of Toastmasters. They're a great group and organization.
It does sound a little intimidating at first, but so, when you first went into that, I mean, how supportive was the group? Like, and I would imagine even the more you do public speaking, I think obviously the more you get comfortable, or a little more comfortable. But it's for some folks, I'm sure it's just always difficult. But even like going into a group where the sole purpose is to get better at it, I'm sure there's still like that hump to get over. Like, oh, I gotta you kind of have, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome or what, but there's still that element of public speaking there. But it sounds like it's a supportive group.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that I've taken. So I'm a podcast nut, and I listen to a bunch of different podcasts. And Dr. Jordan Peterson, he's a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist. He talks about people don't get less afraid. They get more brave. They get more courageous. So the only way that you kind of overcome those fears is by addressing them slowly, you know what I mean, in terms of just maybe just doing a 30-minute talk at a Toastmasters group, and then doing the 2-minute talk, and then doing the 5-minute talk, and slowly building that courage to, face your fears head on.
Now let's talk about preparing for the job market for a minute. So even before you defend your thesis, I know folks in professional development, probably my hub here would tell trainees to, you should still be, even if you haven't defended, be thinking about job applications ahead of time. What were you doing to prepare yourself to be hopefully successful in the job market, even ahead of your defense date?
So there were a handful of things. So one thing is I was always perusing the job boards, just seeing what's out there, seeing the different opportunities that are available, particularly the locations. And so I joined U of R in 2018, so pre-COVID, and it was very interesting to see how the job opportunities transitioned once COVID hit, looking at the more remote options. Some companies had to draw back because supply chains were completely messed up and halted, so some of those jobs vanished overnight. So I think it's incredibly important just early and often perusing job boards, seeing the opportunities available, and then attending any and all career talks, job fairs, any opportunities to network with individuals, alumni, recent graduates that have just launched their careers. Any of those opportunities that you guys at My Hub offer are just invaluable to people that are trying to learn about what jobs are available, and also the roles that are out there. There were a handful of people that came to speak at U of R where going into their talk I was like, oh, this looks like a pretty interesting area that I might be interested in looking more into. And then I heard them talk and I'm like, I want nothing to do with that. And that's just as important as knowing what you do want to do. Knowing, just listening to anybody and everybody talk about their experiences and making that decision for yourself about what works with you, your personality, and your priorities going into your career.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about conferences and networking events. What sort of events did you find most helpful? Was it like industry specific, or I don't know what all kind of different events you may have attended, or I know there's more like young professional events out there. Did you find any particular format or anything more helpful than others?
So there's a couple things on that point. So I only went to one conference while I was in grad school, and that was the ryanodine receptor international workshop. So it was based on the skeletal muscle disorders that Bob Dirkson's lab works on. And the experience that I had there was funny because the way that helped me in terms of finding a job and the networking aspect was actually that I was tasked with writing the white paper. So writing the kind of summary and, summarizing all the talks and things of that nature. So that kind of exposed, once again, that interest in scientific writing by just taking this opportunity at a conference. And so that was kind of interesting that it helped develop, kind of my portfolio when I applied to be a scientific writer, was showing this research workshop white paper that I was the lead author on. That was a great opportunity. But kind of to your point, one of the most useful ways that I was able to kind of like feel out the job market and network while I was still in graduate school was just by talking to my mentor about his past students asking him about what he thinks my strengths and weaknesses are, what areas he thinks that I may excel in after graduate school, and getting in contact with some of his connections from his network that are either in industry, academia, scientific writing, medical science liaisons, whatever, and having those informational interviews. And I did the same thing. He was able to set me up, Bob Dirksen, he was able to set me up with a number of people in various walks of life, various different areas to just chat for 15, 30 minutes to get their feedback on, what they do for their day-to-day operations and how they got there, whether they jumped around a lot, all that kind of stuff. And then talking to the committee members as well. Because, your committee members, some of them have already worked in industry. They've lived in some of these cities you might be applying to, and they're going to be able to provide just invaluable insights to you as well.
I want to jump back to the white paper for a second. That's the first time I've talked to anyone that was tasked with that. How did you, I'm just curious how you got that role for that conference. Is that something you apply to do, or how does that work?
So it was funny. So Bob Dirksen, he's on the scientific advisory board of the RYR1 Foundation. So he helps with setting up these meetings. I believe they meet every 3 years in Pittsburgh. And so he knew that I was going to be graduating, that I had a real interest in scientific writing, and that, he had seen, I'd published a couple of papers before that. And so he kind of understood that, I enjoy writing. I'm a pretty diligent note taker. And so I was essentially a scribe, where these researchers from around the world were speaking for 2 days, and I sat there with a notepad, and my wrist was cramping up, and I was just taking notes the entire time, and was then working with a couple other people that were also tasked with paying attention to different areas of the workshop. And so the four of us then worked together to kind of put together this amalgam of a 30-page summary of what everybody talked about, where the field is, where the field's going, and it was a really cool experience. But it was set up by Bob Dirksen, who was on the advisory committee and was able to recommend me or nominate me to be a scribe for the meeting. So
yeah, got it. And turned out to be a nice work sample for you down the road. So that's great. So you defend your thesis, and then there's the sort of time period where after the thesis defense, maybe there's things you have to do like editing, and maybe you're getting ready to finish up your time and bringing in new faces to the lab. So maybe you're doing some training there, and maybe finishing up some other research papers you've been working on. But then you talked to our trainees about a decompression period. How important is that, and what did you do to sort of decompress after all you had been through in grad school and leading up to your thesis?
Yeah, the decompression period was awesome. I got a taste for retirement, and I loved it. And so I actually got the idea from Tim Ferriss, and a couple other people have mentioned that in between jobs is a great opportunity to really take a little bit of time to explore something that you haven't had the time to explore because you're busy with your graduate studies. And also just a decompression period in terms of being able to sit down, kind of, take a step back, reflect on the time that you spent in graduate school, reflect on the things that you enjoyed from your work, and think about what you want to prioritize going into your career. Whether you want to prioritize that work-life balance, whether you want to be close to your family, all of these things that really play a key role in what jobs you're going to apply to and what you even want to pursue in terms of opportunities. So the decompression period for me was, I believe, 2.5 months. And so beforehand, my dad and I had been planning. I had just gotten into archery hunting, bow hunting. And so my dad and we went out to Utah. We had planned out a trip, and we went out for an elk hunt. And it was amazing. It was 11 days. We were tenting out in the mountains of Utah.
Really?
And just an unbelievable experience of being able to step away and really think about, what's important to me, what do I want my life to look like in my career, and just being able to enjoy and experience this, amazing opportunity with my dad, while both of us have, the health to do it and the time to do it. And that's one of the key things about these kind of like decompression periods between any jobs, is that you take that opportunity while your health is great to experience some of these things that that you want to do in your life. And I thought that was just, it was completely rewarding experience. The one thing to note is that you do have to plan, financially, where, in grad school, you're not, raking in the dough here. So you gotta budget for it accordingly. And another thing is you got to plan about around health insurance. So health insurance was a little touchy-feely. You have a month after you graduate, that last day of the month. And so I was actually hiking up a ridge and, black bear and mountain lion country, and it was about 9:30, 10 a.m. And I was like, oh man, I officially don't have health insurance right now. So it was a little bit of
maybe I should get down.
an awakening experience. So you definitely have to plan for that. But in terms of just reflecting, making sure that you have your priorities straight about what you want your career to look like, your work-life balance, all of those things, I think a decompression period is just completely, it pays for itself in terms of the experiences that you get, and also that opportunity to plan for what you truly want out of your next job and your career.
Now, were you applying for jobs during that period as well, or had you already maybe applied and gotten a job before this, and just sort of waiting for your start date? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so that's another important point. Is I always recommended. I started applying for jobs about 6 months before I defended my thesis, and I actually didn't have much luck. So I would recommend that graduate students start applying even earlier than that. Maybe a year out or 8 months out, whatever that would look like for them, to start applying and at least having those informational interviews and seriously inquiring about openings at those companies and what they might want to get into. So when I defended my thesis, I didn't have the job at Roswell Park lined up yet. So it was time away. When I was in Utah with my dad, I wasn't thinking about it at all, and kind of had that game plan of I'll take care of it when I get back, so that I don't have to I can fully reflect and think about what I want that to look like while I was out there. It would have been great to have something lined up, but that's just not what the timeline looked like. And it worked out great that when I got back, within, I believe it was maybe a week or two, I was able to interview with Roswell Park and get the position. So it did work out well. But yeah, I would recommend, particularly for people that might be concerned about those finances, that need something lined up, either doing a temporary postdoc position, with your mentor's lab or somebody in the department or at U of R, or having that job lined up, well ahead of time while they're planning for their defense.
So let's jump to your current role now at Roswell Park. You are on LinkedIn listed as a scientist at Roswell Park. But can you tell me, what all goes into that title, and kind of what you're working on? And maybe, I know most people's days now, you don't have a typical day, but what a quote unquote typical day looks like for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, especially for me, scientist is an umbrella term, where my day-to-day operations, it's mostly focused on scientific writing, where I'm helping out in terms of some of the graduate students in the lab that I'm associated with here. I help in terms of putting those scientific papers together. A lot of these individuals have never put a paper together before, so it's a great opportunity for me to be a mentor to these graduate students and helping them in terms of all the nuts and bolts of scientific papers, because there are a lot of these rules of scientific paper and scientific writing that you need to follow and to have a good chance of your paper being accepted at a respectable journal. And some of those rules and constructs aren't always intuitive, so that's usually what I'm doing with the graduate students. I also, as a scientific writer, just work on writing papers from scratch, essentially, collaborating with some of the bioinformaticians that we have on site to mine publicly available data sets, or to mine the data that we have from ongoing clinical trials. So it's a real nice balance in terms of working on some of the more preclinical, like mouse work that we have going on in the lab, and also some of the clinical trial analysis and reporting. And then another aspect of my role as a scientific writer is in grant writing. So putting together PO1s, large multi-investigator grants that are these, hundreds of pages of documents, being able to distill that down and make those documents mesh between, 10 different PIs that have their own ways of describing things, and making sure that it sounds like one voice, and going through making sure it's edited properly, that you have all the bio sketches, everything is there for the application packet so that you have the best chance of being successful. So that's kind of the role that I have as a scientific writer. And then I have a couple other roles that I play here as well. So when I joined Roswell Park, one of the key roles was that they were establishing these disease-focused research centers. So the first two that I've been assigned to are the Breast Cancer Research Center and the Pancreatic Cancer Research Center. So with that, one of my roles as a scientific writer is to develop our website. So developing the content for those research center websites, which has been a lot of fun. Some of the press releases of the events that we do, writing those, it's been just a different format of scientific writing. It's been really rewarding. And also playing a role in the coordinator chair in terms of setting up our regular meetings, facilitating different seminar speakers that we invite to come. We had a seminar speaker from Indiana University yesterday, and just making sure that his visit goes smoothly, he has everything that he needs, and that we can kind of use these seminar speakers to facilitate these collaborations between our researchers at Roswell Park and researchers elsewhere. So a great example was that when I came to speak at U of R in September this past year, I was actually, I had a retreat between Roswell Park and the University of Rochester. All the breast cancer, breast oncologists, we had a joint symposia that afternoon. So I was on site, and it worked out great to talk to the trainees, and then also coordinating that joint retreat where we actually were able to develop a couple of collaborations. We're working with some folks at U of R currently. I had to drive down the 90 to deliver some of our slides so that they could do their analysis on our tissues. And so it's a really great opportunity because I'm kind of the coordinator or facilitator for team science. And I think that anytime you're able to collaborate, you're able to get that different perspective, able to add that diversity to your project, that you're going to exponentially expand the impact of your work, because you have somebody that's looking at it from a different angle. They see something that you don't, and you're able to increase that impact and really change the field by working with multiple people from different institutions. So it's been a great opportunity to work as this collaboration facilitator.
So you went from muscle biology, exercise physiology, and now to cancer. Clearly it wasn't. When you were interviewing, what was that an issue? And how did you, how has that transition been? And what kind of learning curve has been there for you?
Yeah, so in terms of the content and the material, it was definitely a jump. So leading into the interview, and also after they informed me that I had gotten the position, I was just asking for any content that I could get in terms of what they were up to, what publications that they'd recently published, what can I read to kind of get a feel for what you guys do, what's your realm, what's your area of expertise, what techniques do you guys use, and even asking to attend seminars, and after I joined, attending any and all invited speakers, seminars, all those things, just to have a crash course in cancer biology. I had attended there were a handful of cancer researchers at the University of Rochester, so I think it's important, even leading up to getting ready for the job market, paying attention to any and all seminar speakers, even though, if they're very different from what you're doing in your graduate work, it could be what you end up working on in your first job out, or down the road at some point. So I think it's incredibly important just paying attention, attending different seminars, and really just garnering any information that you can while you're at U of R or getting ready for that transition to that first job.
And you had probably heard of the title scientific writer before, like when you were a graduate student. Now that you're in that role, I mean, is it like kind of what you had thought maybe back when you were a graduate student of thinking of a scientific writer, or has it been kind of a pleasant surprise of, like, oh, this is what that means?
It's been a couple things. So I was always afraid of writing grants. I don't enjoy writing grants, but the role that I'm playing now in terms of kind of facilitating these grants, it's a lot. I enjoy it a lot more than writing a grant from scratch, especially when you're getting into a new field. I wouldn't be able to put some of these grants together. So I think that aspect of it, I'm still growing in terms of learning the field every day and just getting more more literate in the language and everything that's used in this field. Some of the scientific writing I kind of had an idea of in terms of at least the academic writing. They have scientific writers for industry as well, and a lot of those roles are a lot of FDA, IRB, investigative new drug, all these kind of regulatory writing components that didn't really intrigue me as much. But I kind of had an idea from working on that white paper, publishing research articles in the past, and assisting on review articles. I had an idea of what scientific writing entailed, and so that aspect of the work I was prepared for and excited for. And one of the key reasons that I took this position was that it wasn't just scientific writing. Like I said, it was also doing the administration of these research centers. It was helping to mentor these graduate students at Roswell Park, and planning these international meetings. And so it's a role that involves a handful of different things in terms of preclinical drug development and kind of interacting with some of these companies that are developing these new drugs. And so the scientific writing is a key part of my job, and I'd say I spend maybe 75% of my time doing just that. But that other 25, 30, 40% of my time that I spend on these other aspects of the job are what really make it enjoyable to be able to transition and switch things up. And then, you come back to the writing, and it's much more enjoyable once you kind of step away from it for a minute. So that's a key part of why I joined Roswell Park.
Yeah, you definitely need a break. When you spend a lot of time writing, those breaks are key. Last couple things here, I know also when you came to talk to the trainees late last year, it was, you were talking about the announcement of a new cell and gene therapy hub at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center in Buffalo. Can you just talk a little bit about the excitement around that and how it's going, and maybe any kind of involvement you've been in content development around all of that?
Yeah, so the Cancer Cell Center, all that stuff is super exciting. So I think they will be the biggest academic cell therapy center in the U.S. once the project is completed. They did have a ribbon cutting, I believe, last month. So Governor Kathy Hochul was here, and the CEO of Roswell and Deputy Director, everybody was here for the announcement of the opening of the Cancer Cell Center. So there are parts of the Cell Center that have been completed. I believe they are still finishing up some of the areas, and they're hiring. They're actively hiring. So they're filling a lot of these different positions. It's super exciting because I personally, like I mentioned, I'm not directly in cell therapy, but I'm assisting on a couple of grants where we're trying to implement these cell-based therapies into treating solid tumors. So cell-based therapies have shown incredible potential to treat heme malignancies, blood cancers, been incredibly effective. And one of the main limitations of cell therapy is that it hasn't gotten over the hump in solid tumors yet. It hasn't proven to be as effective in solid tumors. So that's one aspect that I'm involved in currently, is working on developing cell-based therapy as a combination treatment strategy for pancreatic cancer. And so obviously pancreatic cancer is incredibly difficult diagnosis to receive, a 12% 5-year survival rate, so it's very difficult to overcome and to cure. And so one of the initiatives that I'm involved in is this combination strategy of taking 9-10 investigators at Roswell Park, all their different areas of expertise in terms of small molecules to treat the original tumor, treating the tumor microenvironment to make that solid tumor more accessible to a cell-based therapy, and then treating with cell therapy. And all of these cell-based therapies are going to need to be optimized for pancreatic cancer and then optimizing it for other solid tumors as well. So this is a really ongoing project. Obviously with the Cancer Cell Center, being able to ramp up and partner with biotech companies to kind of walk with them side by side in terms of developing their cell therapy and also implementing it into clinical trials to see if it's going to be effective and to see if we can translate it to the clinic so that the most amount of patients can benefit from it. So it's incredibly exciting, and I'm only tangentially involved with what they're doing, but they're going to be on a hiring spree in terms of filling those 20 clean rooms that we have, and so people should definitely look out for that and those opportunities. And I know that there's already been a couple of people from U of R that have graduated that have joined here to work in cell-based therapy development at Roswell Park.
That is exciting, and we'll be sure to put a link to the website in the description, so if folks are interested, they'll be able to click over. Tom, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. If folks want to connect with you after this, should they reach out on LinkedIn? What's the best way to do that if some of our trainees have follow-up questions for you?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn. So I believe it's just Tom O'Connor or Dr. Thomas O'Connor on LinkedIn. I actually also have, in terms of the scientific writing, I've got Instagram account that I'll post some like science-based stuff. So Dr. Thomas N. O'Connor on Instagram. You can check that out and message me on there as well. And you can always reach out. Yeah, LinkedIn would probably be the best way if you have a question or want to connect. That'd be the best way to talk. And I'd be happy to provide any information that I have in terms of helping the trainees to get that first job out.
I love it. So I'll let you sort of send us home here. Any final advice you want to give out for trainees that are either about to defend or about to hit the job market? Anything you want to pass along there?
I'd say expand that circle of comfort. You really push the boundaries and see what you like, what you don't like while you're still in graduate school. If you know that you're into the science and you want to stay at the bench, then learn any and all techniques that you can. So, even if your day-to-day doesn't cover Western blotting or flow cytometry or any of those different areas, get exposed to it. People are, your fellow graduate students are incredibly helpful if you ask, hey, I don't know how to run a qPCR, would you mind showing me? The majority of individuals would be happy to train you in those areas. So I would say just cross-train, get exposed to all those different areas, and just really expand the comfort zone while you have the opportunity and you're surrounded by experts in so many different fields. Really, really tie into the network that you have at U of R now to learn those techniques and to also contact some of the people that they know in industry, in academia, that could help you out in terms of your job search.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Next Step podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share with other members of the University of Rochester community or anyone you think could benefit from these career stories. And we wish you nothing but the best in your own career journey. Until next time.